Hello, welcome. I'm excited to be joining you today. I am over the moon, excited and warm, filled with warmth and all of the things that I feel when I am with this person that you're about to meet. I am very excited to be with Thomas Hitoshi Pruiksma today. I've known Thomas for, well, it's been many years now. I don't remember exactly how many.
At least 8 or 9, I'd say.
Yeah. And I tell you what, I feel like we've known each other lifetimes, maybe. And I don't know if that's just because of your presence and all that your presence carries and your voice and your speech. Thomas is a poet. He is an author. He's a translator. He's a teacher. He's a performer. When I first met him, he was doing poetry. He was translating a work from a Tamil poet. And Thomas, you may hear me say words in the language of Tamil. And if I butcher them, I sincerely apologize. And feel free to correct me. Thomas is a translator of these works, and I'm really excited to have him here today because we're going to talk about his latest project that he's been working on, and I'm going to let him say the names of it and tell you about it. I know that when you hear him speak, you're going to understand what I'm trying to express to you that I feel when I'm with him that I really can't put into words. So Thomas, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I too feel a sense of kinship that goes beyond our usual sense of space and time. And so it's really a deep pleasure and a deep delight to be here. So the project that I have been working on is a translation of a classical Tamil masterpiece on ethics, power, and love. And this work is known by the title Tirukkural, or more simply, we could translate it as the Kural. In Tamil, the word Kural refers to a verse form, a particular poetic form, and the word or the prefix Tiru is an honorific, which could mean honored or great, or sacred, or holy. So we could render the title Tirukkural as the holy Kural, or the sacred Kural, or the Kural. And it's by the poet Tiruvalluvar.
Okay. I'm just going to stop you for just a second there. I just want to let people know, because if you're not familiar with this language, if you're not familiar with this language, it is the word that he is saying is in the transliteration as we will see it, and as you will see it when you look further into his work, is spelled Kural, and that's the abbreviated form of it. Can you say the poet's name again, or the
author, the poet of the Kural is Tiruvalluvar, which of course is quite a mouthful. But just like Tirukkural, which has Tiru at the beginning, Tiruvalluvar also has this same honorific. So we could also simplify his name by saying Valluvar. And the L in that word, the word is often transliterated, Valluvar, Valluvar. The L is actually formed by bringing the tongue to the roof of the mouth, so it's what the linguists call a retroflex L. So Tiruvalluvar, or Valluvar, is the poet's name, and he's honored with the honorific Tiru to become Tiruvalluvar. And he is known as the poet sage of the Kural. And I should say a word about the language that he wrote in. Tamil, which is usually transliterated in English Tamil, and often pronounced, understandably enough in English, as Tamil or Tamil, is the other sacred language, the other classical language, not just the other sacred language, because India is full of sacred languages, but I mean specifically the other classical language of India. When people think about Indian classical languages, they tend to think of Sanskrit. And the reason for that is that the Indianologists of the 19th century, many of them German, focused on Sanskrit because, of course, Sanskrit is full of great riches. But Tamil, interestingly, is the root of an entirely distinct family of languages located in the south of India, what the linguists call the Dravidian family of languages. And it, too, has a very long and venerable history, and in fact has the singular distinction of being a living classical language, a language which has been spoken continuously and which has a continuous literary history that extends back some 2,000 or more years. The languages of South India, many of the other languages of South India, such as Malayalam, spoken in the state of Kerala, or Telugu, or Kannadam, grow out of or are rooted in the Tamil language as a kind of root language of that entire family of languages. And it, for various historical reasons, has not been as widely known outside of India as being a classical, living, vibrant language. But for Tamil speakers, not only is Tamil an extraordinary language, but one of the most important books in the language is, in fact, the Kural, because it is a book that explores the practice of embodying wisdom in everyday life.
I love it. Now, I want to say, because people who come to my meditations and my programs, we talk a lot about sacred language, because my study with my teacher was, I studied with a Sufi guide and master from Jerusalem for many years. His native language is Arabic. Arabic is considered a sacred language in that when you speak the sound codes that make up the words, when you speak the sound codes, the frequency of the vibration that is produced by the sound resonates at the same frequency of the thing that it names. And when you speak of these classical ancient languages, especially one that is at the root of perhaps a whole family of languages, then, I think it must carry that same quality. Is that, when you speak of classical language, of sacred language, what do you mean by that?
One of the things that I mean is that the language carries the living history of an entire civilization, an entire people. And it is a language which has been spoken and sung and chanted and refined over generations and generations and generations in a particular place, a particular landscape. And it grows out of that particular landscape. And interestingly, it may be interesting to note that the first verse of the Kural, I'll just take one moment to step back and say that the entire book is composed of these very short verses called by the name Kural. Each of them is really just a line and a half. If you want to be very specific, it's a line and 5/8. And each chapter in the Kural has 10 of these verses, and they all deal with some specific topic. So the first chapter in the entire book is in praise of God. And it is in praise of God in a very interesting way, because being a poem, each verse is a poem, and then the verses together form a larger interconnected, interrelated poem. The chapter is able to be read as in praise of God, in praise of the gods, or in praise of the godlike teachers of a religious tradition. And one of the most astonishing things about the work, and in my experience of it, is that it is so open to people of many kinds, so that through over centuries there have been different kinds of Hindus who have found their own tradition reflected back to them through this book. At the same way that there were Christian missionaries in India who thought, oh, this is really a kind of Christian book, because they could see their own spiritual experience reflected back. And in fact, it goes much wider than that. I think that anybody who is on a sacred path, a spiritual path, will find verses that resonate with their own specific lineage, their own specific way of walking.
I would agree with that, and even add that just anyone on a quest to live a more authentic life, one that is more heart-centered and true to self, would get immense value from this program, from the book, from reading the book. It's as you said, it's based on ethics, wealth, and love. And
yes, our neighbor is coming. Our dog neighbor has come by to greet us. Yes, the book is
power and love.
Ethics, power, and love. And in fact, these three areas of life correspond with three of the four areas that Hindu tradition distinguish as being central to life. There's the virtue and the life of the home life. There's power and wealth, the life of the community. There's love, the life of the heart, and the life of romantic relationships. And then there's a fourth area, which is liberation. The word in Sanskrit is moksha. The word in Tamil is virda, one of many words. And interestingly, the Kural doesn't have anything to say directly about liberation. And what commentators have said over the centuries is that this is because if you practice the other three areas of life, if you embody wisdom in the home life, in the ethics and the virtues of being at home, if you practice wisdom in questions of power and money and politics, and you practice virtue in the realm of love, liberation happens of a course. It happens naturally and effortlessly. And I think that even before one reads the book, there's a kind of teaching embodied in the way the book has been put together.
Yes, it is absolutely beautiful. Would you be willing to share a verse with us, or give us a sample?
I would be delighted to.
I know you have a chorus in the background to help
Yes, yes, there are many voices interweaving in our conversation.
My teacher used to teach that if there are 7 qualities that the dog carries, that if every human being could truly embody those qualities, we'd all be God realized. So we have
how beautiful.
A sacred gift in your friend there.
Yes. I love, in fact, the reminder of voices beyond our human, a narrow sense of what it means to be a human being, to speak and to be in conversation. So it's as if our canine neighbor is also interested to lend his voice to what we're saying. And in fact, I'll begin with a verse on listening, because Tiruvalluvar gives extraordinary importance to our ears. In fact, he goes so far as to say that what we can receive through our ears is the very highest form of wealth. So already you can see how the entire second section of this book, or the second book of this book, depending on how you render it, it's about power, it's about money, but it's about wealth. But then he turns the ideas that we normally have about wealth on their head. So wealth is also, and more importantly, the wealth of learning, the wealth of knowledge, and the wealth of the ear. So this is a verse, it's the first verse from the chapter on listening. And it goes like this. And I'll share it both in the English and then in the Tamil. I'll do the English, then the Tamil, then the English, so you can really experience something of the poem in both languages. Tiruvalluvar says, riches of the ear, riches among riches, highest of all other riches. Chalvathul selvam savichalvam, achalvam chalvathulellam talai. Riches of the ear, riches among riches, highest of all other riches.
Wow. I'm letting that sink in. You know, what comes up for me when I hear that is the value of truly listening to each other, listening with the ears of the heart, and really being present and receiving. I mean, what better way to receive each other? That's beautiful. And interestingly, in the chapter on power, or on the section, not chapter, excuse me, in the section on power, is it?
Yes, yes. That's I neglected to mention that this verse, this whole chapter, comes in the second section of the book on power, on leadership, on money, and on wealth, as a reminder to specifically to leaders and to the advisors of leaders, to the poet advisors of kings in the historical context, of the fundamental importance of our capacity to listen, to be with each other, to take from what we hear all the wealth, all of the gifts that are being offered to us.
Beautiful. Yes. And a beautiful gift that we can return in compassionate listening to one another. That's
very much so.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, I mean, this is a beautiful example of how people can use this now. Let me ask you, what would you say about, like, to people who are considering diving into this book and listening as they read, taking it in, receiving it? How do you feel that this has the ability to affect people today?
One of the things that makes the book so relevant to my mind is that it speaks to how we practice and embody wisdom and compassion and love and peaceableness in the nitty-gritty of our everyday lives. And so each of the chapters are about very specific areas of life. Listening, for instance, knowing the right time to do something, knowing the right place in which to do something. There's a chapter on rain. There's several chapters on different forms of generosity, different forms of giving. There are 6 beautiful chapters on friendship, on the different aspects of friendship. And because it is such an inclusive and simultaneously open work, open poetic work, in some ways the best way to listen to it is to listen to where any particular person's heart is drawn. It's not a book that you might sit down at a beach and read from cover to cover, although, of course, one could. But it is really a book to read and savor slowly, to read out loud, and because the sounds of the words are as much a part of their meanings, their reverberations in our hearts as the words on the page. And so I've often suggested that people who are interested in the book maybe take a peek through the table of contents and choose a chapter that jumps out at them, maybe for reasons that are obscure or mysterious to begin with, and open, and then maybe just read one verse. Yes. And just sit with that. Speak it out loud. Enjoy it like you might enjoy a grape, or a banana, or a mango, or whatever your favorite fruit or might be, and really just savor that, and then watch what happens. Watch how that verse may remind you of elements of your own experience, how it might resonate with things that you've lived, or with other words that have been important to you, or other people who have been important to you, or creatures, or places. And you'll find that these verses will start to interweave into your day-to-day lived experience. And that to me is really the most joyful and nourishing way to explore the book.
It strikes me that the book is like a gift box that is filled with living gifts. And another way that you could use it is to just, say if you're struggling with something in your life, use it as a reference. And the beauty of it is, and the way that I say a box of gifts is because, as you said, I mean, who would think listening would be under the section, of wealth or power, right? And so it's in unwrapping each one of these gifts, you say, okay, I would like to learn today about friendship, or about being with kindness, or with greed, or, all these, there's a number of different topics that are in the headings, right? So you pick out one from that heading, and as you really sit with it and read it, and I think there's an art to reading these verses. I'll call them verses, if you will. Sure. Because, right, you've preserved some of the structure of the original language as you translated, right? And so each one, as you sit with it, and perhaps even sit in meditation with it, if you do that, it's like unfolding this living gift that really, it flowers like the beautiful flowers behind you. It flowers and fills you with a fragrance that is just, it's a gift you can internalize that really can help to open up new gardens inside of yourself. So, yeah, but do you want to give people a hint about the structure of the language and how you preserved it?
That's a wonderful question. A wonderful invitation, I should say. The most important aspect of the poetry that I have wanted to convey is the qualities that you can experience hearing it or reading it out loud. I have wanted as much as I've been able, as much as is possible, at least for me, to convey at least something of the rhythm of the language, something of the play of vowel and consonants in the language, because that's where the energy of the language comes from. The way the vowels rhyme or complement, ring, reverberate together, and the way that the consonants will sharpen or shape those vowels, which is why I've wanted to bring something of the music of the language into English. And well, of course, I can't possibly do the exact same thing in English that Tiruvalluvar has done in Tamil. I can at least attempt to do something similar, to have a similar play with the language, to find similar vowels and similar consonants that might hope to resonate and reverberate with each other in a similar way. And if I had to name my most important principle in translating this particular book, it would be that. The attempt, sometimes not always possible, to convey the musicality of the language and the wisdom that musicality offers to us.
Beautiful. And I want to say, I would just interject here, if I may, that just tap in as you're reading this book. I know everybody's going to get it. As you're reading this book, tap into Thomas's spirit and into his rhythm, because I feel like you express that in the way that you speak. Your way of speaking, I mean, I think you could be talking to me about going to the grocery store to buy salt, and I would feel like I've just been immersed in poetry. And I think, there was a time when Thomas took some of my classes, and I promise you, I really believe people came to those classes to sit in your presence more than to do the classes, because your way of speaking, your way of delivering language as a gift that can be unwrapped and unfolded and received is just magical. And that's your other superpower, is of being a performer of magic, a magician, right? So it's what you embody. And Thomas is also doing a number of, he's got a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, where he is reading the poetry and he's discussing the poetry with other people that he feels have things to add, value to add to the conversation. So take advantage of that too, and let that kind of help you to get into that rhythm of the language as you're consuming this book and receiving the fragrance of it. It's an invitation to the listeners and readers. So, I'm sorry, did you want to say something more about that?
The intent behind both the short videos, which share just a single verse in English and in Tamil and then in English again with a very short commentary, as well as these longer conversations, are part of my effort to open up the poetry in a sensual way, a way that awakens the senses, returns us to our senses, if you will. Yes. So I really invite people to take a peek and enjoy some of those videos. We'll be releasing one verse a week. There's some 7 or 8 of them there now, and then there'll be one a week for the next year at least, and then a number of these conversations as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, Thomas, can you share with us a little bit about how you got into doing this work? You're American, right? You live in the United States?
Yes.
And what's your background? How did you get here?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And it might be useful to begin by saying I was born in Seattle. And I was born to my mother's family's roots go back to Okinawa, which is, of course, now part of Japan, but has its own distinct culture and long history. And my father's family's roots go back to the Netherlands. So even from the very beginning, I have lived in between worlds, sometimes aware of that and sometimes not aware of that, but feeling what it means to be a person with a foot or several feet in different realms. The story of how this particular translation came about involves my relationship to my Tamil teacher, a wonderful man, Dr. K.V. Ramakodi, who recently died 2 years ago, but who was my teacher for 20 years. And continues to be my teacher in the way that true teachers continue to teach us long after their earthly presence has changed its form. And I had, my teacher awakened me to poetry. He awakened me to language by having me memorize poems. And at the time that he had me do this, I was not particularly interested in poetry, I'll have to admit. Poetry was something that had been taught, I think, rather poorly to me in school, as presented to me as a kind of puzzle. You had to sort of figure out the meaning of this strange, obscure thing. It was like, it's like a locked door, and I felt like I didn't really have a key to get inside. But when my teacher initiated me into studying Tamil poetry, he began me with a 12th century Tamil woman poet and saint named Avvaiyar, and he had me memorize some 25 of her these very short 4-line poems. And because they were 12th century Tamil poems, I couldn't yet understand them directly. I had the gist that he would explain to me in his home when I would go to stay to study with him in his home. But when I was memorizing the poems, all I could do was listen to the sounds of the words. And that proved to be, for me, the great doorway, the great opening. Because listening to the sounds of the words, unconcerned for the moment about what they meant, I could start to hear the sounds of the words in a way I hadn't heard them before, the way that the rhythm would play on my imagination. The sounds of the vowels and consonants would play on my imagination. And so as this process of learning first to read poetry and then to become a poet was continuing, I had the extraordinary good fortune to spend a year living with my teacher in his house on a Fulbright grant. This is in 2003 and 2004. And I was interested in the way that language and land connect, how language and place relate with each other, especially with a language that is as rooted in a place for as long a time as the Tamil languages. And one of the books that we read was this great masterpiece on ethics, power, and love, the Kural. And we read it using a special edition of the book, which includes all of the oldest and most revered commentaries on the work. They go back something to the 11th or 12th century, the earliest commentaries that we have. And then there are a whole series of very famous commentaries. And so we would read sometimes just a chapter a day, reading each verse and then reading all of the commentaries of those verses. Wow. And at the time I had no intention. It didn't even enter my mind as a thought to translate the book. I was really just interested in how to enter the work, to enter the work in Tamil, to be able to think about the poem in Tamil, which is what, my teacher was helping me to do, because we would discuss everything in Tamil. And so I learned not only the language of the poem, but the language of speaking about the poem, the language of these different commentators, some of whom had their very distinct styles, and it took quite a long time to really know how to listen to them. And in the years since this time, this extraordinary year that I spent with my teacher in his house, he would say to me when I spoke with him on the phone or when I was blessed to go back and visit with him in person, he would say, wouldn't it be great if someone were to do a proper literary translation of the Kural? And I'd say, well, of course, sir, I think that would be a wonderful thing for someone to do. Perhaps there's an up-and-coming PhD student studying South Asian languages and the Tamil language who might pick up such a project. And then he'd say, that such a person would probably want to read all of the commentaries that you and I studied together. And I would think, well, that would be a great, very sensible way to approach it. But it really didn't dawn on me that he was very gently suggesting that I translate the work. It didn't even occur to me to try until 2016, or I should say the end of 2015, when I suddenly thought, well, maybe I'll give it a try, because in the meantime, between 2004 and 2015, my own practice as a poet had deepened considerably. And I felt, well, I think I know enough about poetic language and about English and about the depths of English, then maybe I could give it a go as a kind of daily practice. And so on the first day of 2016, I began translating one verse a day as part of my writing life. I would translate that verse and then go on to what I was working on otherwise. And I mentioned this to my teacher on the phone, maybe after I had 2 or 3 chapters done, and he said, "Oh, good. You finally got the hint." And the most interesting thing about this is that my teacher never shied away from telling me exactly what he thought I should or should not do. And yet I think he understood, because he was a poet himself, that he couldn't tell me to do a project this size, to translate a work like this. He could suggest it, and then either it would occur to me naturally or it wouldn't occur to me. And it did occur to me. And then that began what would be the sort of final phase of my apprenticeship with him and to him, because I finished an entire draft, and then I went back to Tamil Nadu in South India, the state of Tamil Nadu in South India, in the summer of 2017, and we read through the entire book together, and he pushed me. He pushed me to deepen my understanding still further of these verses, to make the English more alive, more succinct, more charged, because he had great facility with English and he could read the verses and point things out to me that sometimes surprised me. And I'd get frustrated thinking, oh, I thought that translation was done, and I'd realize I'd only begun to convey something. And then that process, so it was about 5 years of working intently on the translation to bring it to the point that I felt ready to publish it. My fear was that I would, get to draft, 13, 14, 15, whatever number it would be, and I would read it and I'd think it'd be good, and I'd put it in a drawer and I'd take it out again and I'd reread it and I'd realize, oh, I have to do another draft. It felt for a time like an interminable process. Mm-hmm. But at the end of this process, I read the final version and I could say, no, I think I've taken this as far as I can take this now. And it's time to share it and to let it live on its own and let it find its way to ears open to hearing it.
Beautiful. And I'm so glad that you have come to that. And and I hear you speaking, and we are getting the gift of your translation and your study, and also of your teachers. It sounds like, we're getting all of this richness that has come not only through the history of the language and the rhythms and the song of the language, but the commentary of all of the people who have added their commentary, the interpretation from you and from your teacher, and all of this just adds to the richness of what is in this book. And I feel that now. What an honor.
It's certainly been an adventure.
Yeah, I bet. So would you be willing to share another verse with us? Maybe one that, I don't know if your teacher had a favorite, or one that was your favorite to read with your teacher. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
No, this is great. There is actually one particular verse, which I think is the first, or at least among the first verses from the Kural that I ever heard. And this was well before I studied it formally. This was back probably 1999, somewhere. I first started studying Tamil in 1998. And so around then, 1999 probably, even before my initiation into poetry, my teacher shared a verse and explained the meaning of the verse. And I have lived with this verse now for, well over 20 years. And it occurs to me that this is a good verse to share because it can help to illustrate how a person can live with a verse for a time, and how it can grow and how it can become a guide. So the verse, as I've translated it, goes like this. Forgetting good done is not good. Forgetting at once what is not good, good. And the Tamil goes like this. Nandri maruppada nandrandru. Nandralladu andre maruppada nandru. And even someone who has no idea what these sounds are saying, has no experience with the Tamil language, I think can hear that there's a very interesting wordplay going on with the words nandru, nandri, andru, andri, and the consonants at the middle of those words. I'll do it again so you can just listen for how the andru and the andri and the nandru and the nandri sort of play off each other. Tiruvalluvar says, Nandri maruppada nandrandru. Nandralladu andre maruppada nandra. So even when I couldn't understand the verse directly, I could at least start to sense this rhythmic wordplay, which is it was a delight. You can hear the poet taking delight in the sounds of the language to talk about something which is in fact quite serious. As the translation goes, I'll share it again. He says, forgetting good done is not good. Forgetting at once what is not good, good. And he pairs two ideas or principles together. One, which is particularly old. I mean, it's in Tamil, deeply in the Tamil language. I think it resonates with traditions around the world, about the fundamental importance of gratitude. And in fact, this verse comes from the chapter on gratitude. And the idea is that, even if somebody does the tiniest favor for you, that a person of character, a person who strives to be all of who they truly are, remembers that till the end. But the piece that really stood out to me at the beginning, and that my teacher, in fact, emphasized when he first shared it with me, was this other piece about forgetting. Because as he says, on the one hand, you never forget something good that someone has done for you. But that thing that wasn't good, that harm, the suffering someone may have caused you, forget it at once, the poet says. And this was much more difficult for me to accept as an idea or as a principle, because in some ways, Tiruvalluvar himself, his work, especially on power, has a lot to say about justice. And about, the importance of seeing clearly when some evil has been perpetrated and then taking the steps to rectify that. And so I'll have to say that for years I sort of puzzled over this verse. But what my teacher said that very first time, and which would come back to me in my puzzlement, was that, we can dwell on wrongs in the past in such a way that we really wound ourselves. In the language, we could say we traumatize ourselves. Dwelling on this thing. The perpetrator, if we think in those terms, whether or not we remember it doesn't make any difference to them. They're off, doing whatever they do.
Right.
And so there's a way in which, if we can forget the wrong, we release the energy for right action.
Yes. We
release the energy to take those steps which can, in fact, respond with justice, with compassion, with peace in our hearts to wrongdoing in the world in a way that truly grows right action, right relatedness. And so, this is a verse this single verse, a person could spend a lifetime practicing and listening to. What does it mean to forget in that very specific sense a wrong, so that you can act in such a way that your very life brings goodness? That we are, another way to put it would be that we are living with our eyes and with our heart, constantly dwelling in goodness, constantly remembering goodness, so that everything we do grows out of goodness.
Yes, beautiful. And how many times do we allow our woundedness to hold us back from being and flourishing into the goodness that we have and that we are here to be, and really realizing our full potential. And so that, to me, it strikes the chord of forgiveness, and what forgiveness can do. Forgiveness isn't necessarily about forgetting. It's about releasing ourselves from the confines that hold us in the, as you said, in the harm that's been done, and so it's absolutely beautiful. I love that. Great example. So can you tell people how to get the book? The book is available. It's going to be released on January 11th of 2022. 0111-2022. So it's going to be released on January 11th. And tell us about the release or how to get the book.
Well, the book is currently available for pre-order. I know that bookshop.org has, you can purchase it, you can pre-order it through that website at a discount. If you go to my website, thomaspruiksma.com, Pruiksma spelled Pruiksma, Thomas with an H, thomaspruiksma.com. I have all of the links that I know of for the places where you can buy the book. I also encourage people who have a favorite local bookshop to pre-order it through their favorite local bookshop to really support small businesses, local businesses.
Yes, and I'll put these links in the notes.
Wonderful.
Below the video.
And the book, there will be a book launch, and it will be a virtual book launch on the 11th of January. So if you're interested to hear more about the book and more verses, I'll be posting information about that on my website as soon as it becomes available. It will be through the Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I've had the opportunity, the honor to see I know it's not the final draft of the book, but, online. And it's absolutely gorgeous. I cannot wait to get my copy. And I really do want to share it with the world. It's absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to call you when I get it.
How lovely.
The praises. I can't wait to have it in hand. On a lot of times I'll do a what do you call it, a ebook, do things by ebook, but this one is one I really want in my hands. It just is that beautiful. So I greatly thank you for that, Thomas. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave people with?
That's a wonderful question.
Wrap up today.
There's one more verse that I thought I might share as a closing verse, because it has to do with compassion, and it has to do with the way that Tiruvalluvar describes compassion. He speaks of compassion as the capacity of our eyes to move and to be moved. And interestingly, the chapter on this kind of compassion comes in the section of the book on leadership, on being a king or a queen, a leader of a realm. And so implicitly, compassion is about compassion in the world, compassion in in politics, compassion in the politics of our communities, in our compassion, as well as compassion within our own hearts, with ourselves. And Tiruvalluvar gives such importance to compassion that it seems a fitting way to not end, but to conclude this part of this ongoing conversation. So this is the first verse from his chapter on compassion, the title of the chapter I've translated as Eyes That Are Moved, which is a literal translation of the word. Tiruvalluvar says, "The astonishing beauty of eyes that are moved, because it exists. This world exists. கண்ணோட்டம் என்னும் கழிப்பெறும் காரிகை உண்மையான உண்டெவ்வுலகு." The astonishing beauty of eyes that are moved, because it exists. This world exists. Thank you.
Thank you. That is beautiful. And I love, let's make one more note here, that what you've shared about listening, about compassion and kindness, all of these are under power, under this section on power, as teaching us how to be as leaders and as powerful human beings, owning our power owning our power in the world. I love it. And I thank you so much for everything that you've shared, Thomas. And
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, really. It's been a deep pleasure and a deep honor.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we'll have to do more. And maybe after the book comes out, we can, do another one. And for anyone listening, please visit Thomas's website. I'll put the spelling of it, thomaspruiksma.com, and look for his YouTube channel. I'll put a link for that also underneath the video, and subscribe to his YouTube channel. I hope it's okay that I'm inviting people to subscribe to your YouTube channel, because he is, you can just hear, by hearing him speak and feeling the rhythm of the language, it transmits even more than we can get from reading and allowing the fragrance to unfold within us. So I invite you to take advantage of all of these avenues that he has to help us with our own personal life and journey and our travels through this world with ethics, power, and love. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Debra.